Hello patrons, and welcome back to your next real-time tutorial here on Patreon. Today we are going to be working on a sheep that was requested a couple of weeks, maybe a month ago. I feel like it was at the end of the last cycle or something and I put it on the list. I'm sorry, I don't remember who requested it, but you wanted to see a sheep. So we're gonna try and get some texture today. And I'm also going to be recording a video for the channel on the Decadent pie set from Prima. A lot of you guys have been asking about this. We took a poll a few weeks back here on Patreon and you guys said you wanted to see this over a Cotman versus Cotman video. So we're going to be taking a look at it. In the video on the channel, I'm going to be going over more of the pigment type related stuff. I almost said pigment information, but there is none for Prima, so just best guesses at them. And I'm going to be painting for you guys a real-time tutorial of the sheep that will also be like a super sped up version in the on-channel video. So I hope you guys enjoy it today. If you guys haven't seen the Prima sets before, these are fairly popular amongst crafters. They come in these metal tins, and before these metal tins were widely available through Meeden, a lot of people purchased these Prima sets even if they only wanted the tin and didn't want the paint. They're all labeled with a fairly sticky label that is hard to get off on the front with the name of the set. They have at least 6 or 8 different sets from the company with different assortments, and they are all numbered. So this set, the Decadent Pies, is 25 through 36. And each set has a unique set of colors, but like I mentioned before, there's no information on the pigment composition. So we're taking our best guesses. This set I think might have a few single pigment colors, but mostly they're going to be dual or triple or I don't know, even quadruple pigment colors depending on what they are. The set contains 4 kind of shimmery, I wouldn't call them metallic, but maybe like a pearlescent type of color. I don't even know if you can really see them that well. The white is just like the faintest little shimmer. The Earl Grey that they it's basically kind of a silvery color, is really hard to re-wet. Even after letting it soak, it barely had any pigment payoff. I do like the gold. They call theirs pistachio cream. It's got like a really subtle shimmer on it. And then the guava meringue is also a shiny color. The other 8 are standard flatter colors, although this set does have some crumbly pigment texture that I noticed. If you have been following the channel for a long time, I did a video on Jane Davenport paints a while back and reported that they had like this really chunky texture, and a lot of people have speculated that Prima and Jane Davenport paints are from the same manufacturer, and I can't confirm that because I don't know, but these did behave exactly the same way. So particularly in these 2 lighter colors here, they're almost like sandpaper on the top of the pans. There are other colors that are smoother and that isn't as problematic, but just so you guys know that. I'm not sure which of the colors we're going to use. We're just kind of going to feel it out as we go through our painting. This is the reference photo I'm using. I'll put a link in the YouTube description below. I am going to pull out some of those blue tones and probably use our blackberry to kind of deepen up our different shadow areas, and then I'll use a combination of like the pumpkin, maybe the banana cream, and even maybe a little bit of the apple or pecan depending on where we're going. And then to let you guys kind of know briefly, if you're watching this tutorial before the other video makes it onto the channel, a couple similarities. This apple color is very similar to a Quin Burnt Scarlet. The pumpkin is very similar to a raw sienna. So just don't worry about your pigment composition. Don't worry about the specific colors I'm using. If you don't have this Decadent pie set, just grab something that looks close to it. I'm a big proponent of using what you have instead of going out and buying new colors. But if you have any specific questions, go ahead and let me know in the Patreon comments and I will get back to you on those. But for now, let's go ahead and jump on in, so since it's already been like a 4 to 5 minute intro. So I think I can probably call this my standard setup now. I've used it enough times where I've got 2 of my silver black velvet brushes, one that I use to paint with mostly, and then the other one I use with clear water so that we can fade off onto the sides of the pages a little bit better. Let me flip this around so it's easier to use, and let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we're going to be starting off. I have some of this raw sienna mixed in with a little bit of the peach cobbler and some of the pearlescent white. They call it white mocha. I'm only using the pearlescent color because I want to try and give this a fair review, and since a third of the paints are pearlescent, I figure I need to try them out. But they're definitely not something I would typically use in a painting of a sheep. But we'll try and get a little bit adventurous here. So I'm just going to start laying in that lighter color and just use the tip of my brush to create some texture here. I have a feeling I'm going to be going back and forth quite a bit with my water and with some paper towel. Let me get some paper towel real quick. Because I already put down too much pigment here to begin with, so we'll lighten that up a little bit. And I think the main question regarding this subject was how to kind of get this wool texture. I've never painted a sheep before. I'm going to kind of treat it like I treat other longer haired animals and see what we can get done. But the main thing is to keep your highlights, making sure that you have some areas of relief on your page so that it's not all just one color, or that your lightest color isn't the paint that you're using. And we're just going to go in and do that value map first. We've talked a lot about that in our tutorials in the past, where just trying to get down the general values in a painting so that we can more accurately put down layers in the future. I am using Arches watercolor paper here. These are a craft quality paint. They are not artist quality. But I figured that in order to give them a fair shot, we should use the paper that we always use. And I always use Arches. Not always. I always use cotton paper though. That's a pretty standard claim, unless I'm doing swatches, and I sometimes use cellulose. This color's going down very much like a yellow ochre would. I don't see too much difference. I'm not noticing much of the shimmery texture, although we can wait till it dries to kind of see the full effects there. So if you have a yellow ochre, just grab that. These are my first impressions of this paint. I've only done one other painting with these before, and that was in a video that I did last year around this time when I went to visit my sister. She had the Decadent pie set, and I did a really quick little like a landscape painting. It wasn't very good, but we were kind of pressed for time, and we were doing kind of like a little fun video between the two of us. So that's the only other experience I've had with this paint. I've not painted with it on cotton paper, but my first impressions are that if you already have paint, I don't think you need this set. Like if you already have these colors, if you're looking to try out some paints, you don't have a lot in your collection yet, and these are colors that you would enjoy, I mean, we'll see how it goes, but like it might be suitable for that. And if you're just looking for the tin, I don't think you any longer need to go with a Prima set like this. I think you can just buy the medium tins, and they're going to be a little bit cheaper for you anyway. So that's just my first thoughts on the matter. Hope you guys have had a good October. Mine, of course, was busier than I thought it would be. I finally got that Skillshare class out, so that was good news. And if you haven't heard or seen anything about that, I have a Skillshare class now on creating your own palettes if you want to mix together your own colors. to kind of curate your own palette. That is a available resource now. These Decadent pie sets are kind of the opposite of that. They curate these different sets of colors that Prima fills work well together, and market them so that you guys don't have to worry about putting together palettes. So it just depends on what route you want to take with that. All right, I'm just gonna soften this up here with my water on the water only brush. I keep wanting to say water brush, but that's a different tool. You guys will know what I mean though, right? And we're just kind of working with our different textures here. The area right around the face seems to be a bit straighter, and then it gets a little curlier as we move further away from the face. So I'll try and emulate that a little bit. I think one of the comments that came with the request for sheep was my own curly hair journey. However, I've not really done much in terms of different types of hair texture. Long hair is already pretty difficult, and there's actually not very many animals that have curly hair, so it's not something I come across very often. And I'm just going to try and treat it like I would treat other subjects, and hopefully that relieves a little bit of your pressure. I don't want to go into this whole thing thinking I have to paint every strand of hair. You never want to paint every single strand of hair on an animal in a watercolor painting unless you're going for hyperrealism, because if you don't keep that level of detail up throughout the entire painting, it's going to look unfinished. So if we keep this nice loose texture throughout the piece where we're suggesting that we've got this fur texture, at least for my style, that'll work out a lot better. So I'm trying to drop in these areas that are a higher concentration of pigment. It's already looking pretty fluffy, which is fun. This, of course, is still all in this yellow ochre type color, so the sheep on the reference photo is definitely more of a gray, and we'll go in with other layers later, but I like to go in with these really light, gentle, easy colors first, because if you ever need to lift anything, they're a lot more forgiving than, say, the two blues in this set, I think, have some fairly staining pigments in them. Just kind of scrolling down my reference photo as we go. This sheep is more lit from this direction, so the darker areas are going to be over here. So I'm going to switch over to that pumpkin color, which is a darker, more raw sienna-like color versus yellow ochre. I want to drop in some of this indigo. I'm a little worried it's going to make green. No, okay, we're all right. As long as we don't mix it up too much, we should be okay to drop in some more of this pigment. It's got a very spider vein fingery texture to it, which is kind of characteristic of like core colors. Not that this is a core color, obviously. These don't have the same binder at all, and they're much lower quality, but it's got that similar texture. If you're familiar with core, it might be something you can relate it to. That might look weird right now, but I'm going to try and drop more of this blue into the rest of the painting too, so it won't look as out of place. I believe Lindsay, the Frugal Crafter, has a couple of sheep videos, at least one, but I think she has more than one. If you want additional sheepy references. I'm not going for a hyper-realistic palette here. I'm more so playing into the colors that are in this palette. I'm giving it more of a more whimsical feel. Just going to kind of tap some of these edges so that they're not all completely hard. I'm going to turn my paper and we're going to come in here and do some negative painting. So negative painting is when you're painting like the darker shadows and leaving a shape formed by those shadows. So I'm not painting the front wool texture that's lighter, I'm painting the shadow behind it so that we can see that texture a little bit better. I think I want to come in just a little bit more here. And then we're just gonna feather that off only on the side going away from that edge. And then just gently in a couple of really select places, we'll bring that forward on the other side. Oops. Sorry about that, I dropped my brush. All right. Let's start to move this blue up into the rest of the painting as well. There's only a very soft shadow in this upper region here. Most of it is very lightly colored, so I'm going to dilute this and just drop in a little bit for some contrast with that yellow. And then we'll also drop in some of that lighter color. And the kind of golden color is going to suggest like, oh, the light is hitting this here because it's a nice warm tone, whereas the blue is going to suggest that it's more in shadow. You can of course push that in different compositions depending on your artistic take, but it will help us in this particular instance. Just kind of taking in everything, seeing what we need to adjust. I want to be really careful since I'm using this really dark blue color. I don't want any of the water or the brush to be carrying over any of that pigment. I don't want it to be murky or green. I want the two colors to be fairly distinct on the painting. I'm gonna kind of glaze all of this. The whole leg is in shadow. And then we'll go back later and put in darker areas of shadow. But for now, none of this is really going to be lighter. We do have another little darker, shadowy fur patch down in this corner. It's a continuation of this darker area. All right, back up here. Come into the ears. And the shadow right behind the eye. It's pretty prominent in the photograph. We're going to continue that. Use the tip of our brush to negative paint those little ear hairs with. I'm going to zoom you in for the other ear so you can see that whole process a little bit better. I'm going to turn. So my hand is at the right angle. Hoping to get this layer on the first try, unlike the other side where I had to kind of lift and come back and forth. There's a slight little, I'm not trying to outline, but there's a slight dark edge that is kind of inside the lighter fluff that you can see kind of as a rim light. Yeah, that ear looks a lot better. If you are doing this with other colors, and if it seems to be, I would test your glazing before you go in and make sure that whatever blue color you're using is not going to make things too green. And if it does, go ahead and pick a grayer variety of that color, like a Payne's gray maybe, where it's got like a subtle blue hint, but is still distinct enough not to mix to green. All right, let's see. So right along this whole edge, we've got a darker shadow. And we're going to carry that out in kind of more of this straight hair type of pattern. Oops. It's really deep right under the chin. Right now I can let you know, like in my own head, I'm a little scared. This definitely isn't like the color palette that I would typically use for this type of subject. It's atypical for me to use these really harsh contrasting colors, although I really like it when I see other artists using these colors. So I'm just gonna have faith in the process, and we're gonna try and see it through. There's a little bit of shadow on this side, but not as much as the other side. So we're just gonna go ahead and put some of that in here, but not as strong as on the other side. I need to stop it from encroaching on the face because that was wet when I went in. And also, I've mentioned this a while back, but it's been a while since I have. If you're ever using paper towels in your work, I really highly suggest using Viva paper towels, the ones that don't have texture. I ordered some online from Viva thinking that they all came without texture, but the ones that I got have a pattern on them, and what happens is when you have a quilted pattern and you press it down into your page, it's going to end up leaving some of that texture behind. In this case, maybe it's not a bad thing because it might help add to our sheepiness, but typically it's not something you want. Right now I'm also feeling like I'm losing some of this really nice texture that I had before, and that's always kind of a threat when you are working with lots of layers. Like you're gonna have layers that are gonna cover up other layers, even if they're not opaque colors. You're just gonna lose some of that like ethereal, floaty quality. I'm going to try and add in some more of that with this new layer. Another warning that I have seen a lot of, particularly on wet canvas, I saw a few people talking about it. It's an online forum for painters. A lot of people were saying that because we don't have pigment information, like we can't know what the light fastness is either, and one person was posting that they were doing their own light fast tests, and that, I don't know which set they had, but they were testing, I think, at least 2 sets of them, and a large number of the painting, or the swatches, faded. So just keep that in mind that, oh, I'm gonna sneeze. Sorry. Felt that one coming for a long time. They were saying that the light fastness wasn't very good on a lot of them, and that a large number of them faded. So just be aware of that if you're selling your artwork. I wouldn't recommend using these unless you've got your own light fastness test that you've done and you feel comfortable with how they've performed. And I'm sure that that varies from set to set, because depending on the colors that are in them, that's going to change things pretty drastically. If you have really bright colors, with like operas and, you know, other things like that, it's going to be less light fast than these earth tones, right? So you just have to keep that in mind. We don't know if this darker color contains Prussian blue, and Prussian blue can be a tricky color, so just be aware. I haven't done my own light fastness test yet, so I can't help you with that right now. Every once in a while I'm glancing back at my reference photo to make sure that I've got my general values in the right spot, but for the most part I'm looking at my painting in this particular case to make sure that the layers are balanced and that I feel like they're working well together. I can see, like, down here we've got this big white patch that I don't feel has enough color at all. It's just too light in value, so I'll drop in some of that yellow. But you can see here when I drop in the yellow, it picks up some of the blue, so that's why I wanted to do the yellow first in most of the areas, just so that we wouldn't have that issue. All right. We're going to come across the chest here and do a couple of these little fluffy layers. I want them to be quite varied. I don't want them all to look exactly the same. One of the worst things if you're doing like feather or long hair or leaf patterns is that you don't want it to repeat itself, because nature is not perfect in most cases, and in these specific instances that I'm talking about, like, the things don't repeat and look the same in every row. Obviously there are some exceptions, like in succulents. They're pretty symmetrical in terms of, or they can be, I'll say they can be symmetrical in terms of their appearance. But fur, wool especially, natural wool, is not going to be that way. As we get down here, we kind of want the suggestion that it goes in towards the center, the midline. And we really have some heavy values down towards the bottom that I'm going to try and reinforce here. We definitely want a point of contrast. I think we talked about that was it the last video I did? It might have been the Frochillibuck, our little made-up creature. Sometime recently I was talking about the importance of contrast and that we need not to be afraid to add in some of those really dark values to make the light ones pop. We want a nice even balance so that it's not too heavy or it doesn't fatigue our eyes when we look at it and things like that. But if we don't have any dark values, then it's going to be a pretty boring image in terms of visual interest. So by dropping in some of these really dark tones, it's scary, but it'll help pull these forms together in the long run. Oops, sorry. Let's get you back on camera here. This sheep is also standing in a field, so I'm going to pull some of the green in from the set when we get to that point so we can show off another color. I do really like the green in this set. It is kind of between a sap green and an olive green. We've got sheep and cows and even horses sometimes will get like little grass stains on the fronts of their knees. And in this type of area, this is really where the two brushes is going to come in the most handy because I'm using the super dark pigment. And one, if I keep rinsing every time I want to soften off an edge, I'm going to waste a lot of paint, but I'm also going to get my water really dirty and I'm going to have to change it more often. So I'm just trying to conserve my resources in general. You can see in this line here that I just did that there's some repetition. So my main goal when I go in with water is to break up that repetition and make it look like it's not made with the same tip of the same brush. And then we're going to get that little knee patch in again. My horse had white stockings on all her legs. She was a paint, but it was like a low patterned paint. So most of her body was brown, but her legs were predominantly white. And so horses don't lay down very often, but when she would lay down, she'd always get like stained knees from the grass, especially in the springtime. All right, let's see. Most of this edge is going to be formed by the grass, so I know you're still zoomed in. I know you don't have big picture stuff, but I'm just gonna try and scan, see if there's any other areas we want to put in. There's a pretty big drying shift with this darker color in particular. Just trying to darken up some of those areas again. There's not a lot of interest over on this side. It starts to get a little wispier. So in general, there's less texture here, even on the photograph, but I want to make sure there's a little something there to keep our eyes on. Scooch back up to the head. And I think I'm going to switch to my smaller brush. Let me just finish this top area real quick. A little fluff up here so it matches the rest of our fur. Our wool, sorry. Sorry, little sheep. Oops, sorry. The camera's focused really low on my desk. Now in the reference photo, you can really see the fur because of the fact that there's grass behind the sheep. I don't think I'm going to bring the green all the way behind the sheep for this painting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and come in with my lighter color, and we're just going to add a little bit of extra fluff to the top here, so that it's not just floating in the middle of nothing. And then I'm going to lift some of that color so it's just like a really faint addition. And now we're going to switch over to our little brush. Let me refocus this camera so it's a little bit more comfortable to paint. Oops. All right, let's go ahead and put in our eyes. I'm gonna do this golden color. Sorry, not gold. It's the same raw sienna type of color we've been using. We can maybe add a little bit of the actual gold. Hi, kitten. It's not dinner yet. Sorry, kiddo. It's only 3:30. All right, so darker color. We're gonna put in some of our darkest points. I think I have the wrong brush. I do have the wrong brush. This is the one that doesn't have the good tip on it, and we want a nice fine tip for our painting here. hold this to the side. We're gonna drop in our nostrils. And then we also have a really dark area underneath the lips. We can go ahead and actually we can use our not good for detail brush to be our second water brush. And we're just gonna pull some of that texture forward. Yeah? That was kind of a rude noise. I'll come pet you after we're done. I know, I see you. I know, life is not fair. It's too bad you don't have opposable thumbs. You could get dinner for yourself. So you can see this initial color that went down really dark has lightened quite a bit, and if I go ahead and try and add too much more to this wet wash, it's just going to kind of go everywhere. So I'm going to drop in a tiny bit towards the center because I want it to feather out a little bit. And then we're going to wait for that to dry before we do any more detail with it. We can go ahead and come up to this top side here. Kitten, you're being so silly. It's pretty important to reference your values here of your reference photo because it'll really guide you in where you need those contrasting values to be. That'll help your painting to read stronger. Take a bit more of this concentrated color into the area right behind the eye and into the ears. Kitten, please don't play with the cords. I should run an experiment someday. I usually end up recording these Patreon tutorials in the afternoon, and they almost always, like, they're not exactly the same time, but they tend to be within the same between lunch and dinner segment. I wonder if I did these later at night or really early in the morning, if she would demand the same attention. She usually sleeps during the morning, so if I can ever get myself up and ready in time, that would be a good control. Oh, yeah, we're grumpy now. We're leaving. All right, bye, Cricket. I have been ignored for too long. Oops. Okay, so I was trying to go back in for some of my raw sienna color, but my brush was not clean all the way, so I contaminated it. So I need to make sure to get fresh paint. I'm going to go in here and drop kind of like my mid-tones with the yellows. You can see how usually my second attempt at something when it comes to symmetry works out better. I really like the left ear better than the right. I think the colors are cleaner, the glazes are cleaner. It just goes to show that practice does make a difference. If you're worried about it at home, you can always try and do like a test shape of whatever you're having trouble with on a scrap piece of paper even. Get the first one out of the way and then come back to them when you're feeling more confident. I want to get some of this contour in with the lighter color, but I will be going over on top of it with the blue as well. It's starting to turn green in some of these lighter glaze areas, so we're gonna have to make different decisions about which colors go where. Even if it's not my first choice, this darker blue will read better in this particular area. I'm gonna go ahead and I think drop in some color here. Be really careful about it. I come up over the top of the eye. Swoop down, and then got some darker fur that comes forward. Sheep and goats have horizontal pupils, so you want to get the shape of that right. I'm going to go ahead and dilute some of this blue. We'll go ahead and put a little bit more of this contour. Oops, just painted the desk. There's a really dark, like the eyelid on the bottom is really dark. But I think that this area here is a little bit too wet to do anything about that right now. We'll come back to it. Move to the other side. Check the placement of that eye. And then our pupil goes in. And go back over this pupil on the other side, make sure it's really nice and dark. A little bit more definition to this ear. Oops. And then we're also going to add more definition to the nose. I definitely feel like we have too much blue in this eye, but I don't know that I can fix it with my regular paints. I think we can go in there with some white paint and do that. Although let's go ahead and mix up, we'll just see really quick. I'm going to mix up some of the metallic gold with the raw sienna-like color, see if we can get kind of an opaque thing going on. There we go, that's not too bad. I'm going to mostly add this color to the corners of the eyes. Oh, hi Cricket, you're back. Yeah. And then I'm going to go back to my larger brush. We're going to drop it. Cricket, no. No, no, no. The entire bed is covered with a comforter except for like an 8-inch square by my pillow. And that's, of course, where she goes to sit to protest. the fact that she is not getting fed. Excuse you. You can't eat dinner at 3:30. You will be hungry again very soon. It's for your own good. Cricket is a very good cat, and for the most part, I'm very lucky that she doesn't have a lot of vices, but she is an overeater, so there's no setting out food and letting her self-regulate. The vets have had her on a diet for like 6 years. She still doesn't seem to, well, she doesn't seem to gain weight, but she doesn't seem to lose it either. I hear you, girl. All right, we're gonna go ahead and put in a couple more little highlights, lower down on the painting. Shouldn't say highlights, but like brighter areas maybe. Go ahead and add a little bit to the knees. Some of this yellow relief from all the blue in the painting. Part of me really wants to add in one of these reds, like the burnt scarlet light color. But I don't know if that's a wise idea at this point. Especially if we're gonna add the green grass, it might get too holiday-y. And put in light glaze up here. We just want to shape the top of these eyelids a little bit. Add in just a little bit more contrast down here. Smooth those off because those aren't particularly textured areas. And I think maybe do just one more pass. Try to zoom out so I can see all my values here. We'll do one more pass of the dark blue underneath the chin. We're just going to do a couple more darker areas on this side of the neck. I'm gonna go ahead and let that dry, and then we're gonna come back and do the grass and the highlights and finish them up. Alrighty, our sheep is done and ready for our grass to go in. I think that I'm gonna just do it on the bottom, but we're gonna see how it looks once it's kind of weighted down here. This is mostly the green from this set with a teeny bit of the indigo-like color. That wasn't quite intentional. I'll say that the pans were next to each other and the water kind of exploded all over the place, and it's actually a good idea though, because we have that indigo in the rest of the painting, so bringing this green in will be a nice touch. So the areas that we want to be most careful around are here where the grass starts to overlap the legs. So I'm going to just kind of come up with a couple blades of grass that kind of frame our piece a little bit, using a very light hand, and I don't want it to be too shaggy. I'm going to soften that off a bit. There we go. All right. Just little touches. I want to work quickly enough that I am not losing my edge where the water is, but also try and make sure I'm mindful about where I'm putting things. There's more of the indigo mixture in this batch. Some of our little grass seeds here and there. So it's more of that blue again. All right, I think I'm going to do a couple more little grass seeds up here just to break things up a little bit. And yeah, I think that's gonna do it for the grass. The last thing that we need to do is just add in some highlights. Here it is. It's not in its usual spot. I'm just gonna get some of our white ink as per usual. We're going to add just enough water that it is a paintable consistency. We still want it to be thick enough to be opaque. Wipe the ferrule off so we don't drop a bunch of water. Get our highlights in there. Let's zoom in a little bit, see what else we got going on in the picture. I'm gonna kind of twirl my brush on a surface to get a nice thin line, hopefully. Nope. This is the bad brush, I should have switched. Alright, and then I'm just going to put in a couple little white flecks. If you want to bring the background up around the top so that you get this outline on the ears without adding a white to it, that would be totally reasonable. I feel like I've messed up the eyes, but don't have many ways to fix that. Let's see. I just put in some of the yellow, and then we're gonna go ahead and trim up that white line with a darker color. And there we go. Good enough. I'm just going to kind of splatter down some of these white marks over on the edge here. Again, not quite the same effect as if you went in here with a darker color and just outline that area. Alright, I think that's gonna do it. Thank you guys for watching. I know this wasn't quite the typical tutorial since we were using different paints, but again, use what you have. You can use other colors even. If you want to reimagine this instead of yellow and blue, you could use 2 other colors. Just have fun with it. The big takeaways in terms of texture are just to use your brush, to use a mixture of hard and soft edges so that you've got lots of different textures. Really try and convey the shadow if you're working with a reference with a strong shadow. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you guys again for watching. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial, and I'll see you around on the channel. Have a good one. Bye.